Now, we've seen black box testing, designing a test suite based on just paths through the specification. A nice complement to that is glass box testing. That's where we're going to use the code itself, the implementation, to guide the design of test cases. Obviously, looking at the code should give us a more complete handle, if you like, on trying to figure out where there might be possible bugs. And so let's think a little bit about what it means. And again, the name sort of suggests it. Glass box says I can see inside to figure out what's going on. A glass box test suite, a good one, is called path complete if every possible path through the code is tested at least once. Now, if you think about it, that's not always going to be possible. If we've got a loop, we might be able to say what happens if the loop is executed once, executed more than once. But to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 1 billion times, again, we may not be able to test all of them. But we can certainly talk about different samplings of tests through a loop. Same thing with a recursive function. There may be arbitrarily deep levels of recursion, so we may not be able to test all of it. But the idea of testing multiple paths through the code, and if possible, all paths through the code, is really nice. Notice, by the way, even a path-complete test suite can still miss a bug. It'll depend on the choice of examples. But if it is path-complete, if we're exercising every path through the code, at least we're more likely to find a bug if it's there. Now, let's look at a little example. Here's a simple little piece of code for finding absolute value. Assumes x is an int. It's going to return x if x is greater than or equal to 0, and return minus x otherwise. And since I know that x is an int, I can do some good sampling here. And you can see the code inside. Now, what would a good test suite here be? Well, one sample of a test suite would be to pick the values of -2 and 2. It's certainly path complete, right? If it's -2, it's going to take this path. If it's +2, it's going to take this path. So it's looking at both paths through the if clause. On the other hand, it's going to miss a case. And it will miss, in fact, this case here of looking at abs of -1, which in this case gives me a bug. Because, in fact, I should have had x less than or equal to up here to catch that case. What does that say? It says it's not just being path complete, but we want to think about boundary cases. And here, the code itself gives us a boundary case. Since that's the test, I ought to pick that up as one of the boundary cases. When it's at that boundary, when it's below that boundary, when it's above that boundary. But here's a case where I do explore all the possible paths. I've got a path complete a set of tests. Okay, so what can we do with this? Well, here's some simple rules of thumb. In a second, we're going to get to an example, but here's some rules of thumb for how you do good glass box testing. First, make sure that both branches of all if statements are checked. I just did that in that particular case. Similarly, ensure that every except clause is executed. We're going to return to this. We haven't talked a lot about excepts so far, or exceptions, but it's the same idea. Every time I've got an exception, make sure I actually test that. If I have a loop, a for loop, I want to have tests where the loop's not entered, where the body of the loop is executed exactly once, where the body of the loop is executed more than once. As I said earlier, I can't do all possible versions of more than once, but I can sample those 3 because they tend to expose places where there are bugs. Same thing for a while loop. Do the same thing I did for for. The loop's done not done, done once, done multiple times. But also I want to catch all the cases here where there are different ways to exit the loop. If there are different parts of my loop where I can break out of it, I want to catch all of those. If I've got a recursive function, I want to test what happens if there's no recursive call. It's just the base case. What happens if there's exactly one recursive call? And again, if there's more than one recursive call. And you can see this pattern of none, one, and more there and here. And that's a common thing that I'm going to want to try and use as I build different test suites for doing glass box testing.